Once upon a time in the serene town of Riverdale, there stood a magnificent mansion owned by the wealthy and distinguished Mr. Edwin Langston. A man of sophistication and charm, Mr. Langston had everything one could dream of: wealth, respect, and a loyal servant named Thomas. At least he thought Thomas was loyal. When Mr. Langston announced he would be traveling overseas for a year on business, Thomas's face dropped, expertly feigning heartbreak. "Oh, Master Edwin, how shall I survive without you? The house will feel so empty, so lifeless," Thomas wailed, clutching his chest dramatically. But deep down, Thomas was grinning from ear to ear. As Edwin packed his finest suits and cufflinks, Thomas was already scribbling his own plan. A plan to turn the stately Langston Manor into the most infamous brothel in Riverdale. With his master gone for a year, he had the perfect opportunity to rake in wealth and prestige of his own. The moment Mr. Langston's carriage disappeared over the hill, Thomas sprang into action. First, he hired a crew of questionable laborers to redecorate the house. Out went the antique furniture and oil paintings, and in came crimson velvet curtains, gaudy chandeliers, and beds in every room. The once majestic library? Now a sultry lounge. The dining hall? Converted into a dance floor. "We'll call it the Scarlet Manor," Thomas announced to his new recruits, a motley crew of entertainers and workers. "By the time Master Edwin returns, I'll be richer than him." To ensure his enterprise ran smoothly, Thomas scoured the town for talent. He interviewed everyone from dancers and musicians to specialists who promised to entertain Riverdale's elite. These interviews took place in the former parlor room, where Thomas sat behind Edwin's mahogany desk, puffing on a cigar he'd found in the study. "Next," he called, waving his hand imperiously. In walked a woman in an elaborate feathered headdress. "Name?" Thomas asked, pen poised over a stolen notebook. "Ruby Bell," she said with a wink. "Can you dance?" Ruby Bell promptly launched into a mesmerizing routine that involved a chair, a fan, and an acrobatics move that made Thomas nearly fall out of his seat. "You're hired," he exclaimed, slamming the notebook shut. Next. By the end of the day, Thomas had assembled a colorful cast of characters who would make the Scarlet Manor the talk of the town. Thomas spared no expense advertising his illicit enterprise. Flyers were slipped into every tavern and marketplace. Whispers of the luxurious Scarlet Manor spread like wildfire. Within weeks, Riverdale's elite and not-so-elite flocked to the mansion for revelry and debauchery. Thomas strutted through the halls like a king, decked out in a velvet robe and gold chains. He'd even started referring to himself as Sir Thomas, much to the amusement of the patrons. The money poured in and Thomas's ego swelled. Master Edwin's wealth? A pittance compared to mine, he boasted to anyone who'd listen. One evening, Thomas was alerted to the arrival of a particularly prestigious guest, Mayor Gladstone himself. The mayor, a portly man with a bushy mustache, was known for his love of fine wine and finer company. "Welcome, Your Honor," Thomas said with a bow, adopting an air of exaggerated refinement. "Well, well, Sir Thomas," the mayor chuckled, playing along. "I've heard rumors about this place and I must say, it exceeds expectations." Thomas led the mayor to a private lounge, ensuring he was treated to the best food, drink, and entertainment the Scarlet Manor had to offer. By the end of the night, the mayor was singing Thomas's praises. "You, my good man, are a genius," he slurred, raising his glass. "To the Scarlet Manor." Thomas grinned, basking in the glory. Little did he know, his moment of triumph was about to come crashing down. 4 months into his escapade, Thomas was hosting one of his most extravagant parties yet. The Scarlet Manor was alive with music, laughter, and clinking glasses. Amidst the chaos, no one noticed the sleek carriage pulling up the driveway. Mr. Edwin Langston stepped out, his brow furrowed. His business trip had concluded early, and he'd decided to surprise Thomas. But as he approached his front door, the muffled sounds of jazz music and raucous laughter stopped him in his tracks. "What in heaven's name?" Edwin muttered, pushing open the door. The sight that greeted him was beyond comprehension. Women in flamboyant dresses lounged on velvet sofas. Men danced wildly with drinks in hand. The chandelier swayed precariously as someone swung from it like a monkey. "What in the name of?" Edwin roared, his voice cutting through the noise like a whip. The room froze. Every head turned toward the furious man standing in the doorway. Thomas, holding a bottle of champagne, paled. "And Master Edwin, you're back early," he stammered, dropping the bottle, which shattered on the floor. Edwin stormed through the house, his face turning a shade of red not even the velvet curtains could match. "My house. My beautiful house. What have you done to it?" Thomas scrambled to keep up, trying to explain. "Well, you see, Master, it's not what it looks like. Not what it looks like. My library is a lounge. My dining hall is a dance floor. And is that my great-grandmother's portrait hanging in the bathroom?" Edwin bellowed. Thomas winced. It adds character?" Edwin's glare could have melted steel. "Character? You turned my house into a brothel, sir," piped up a cheeky patron, earning a death glare from Edwin. The next hour was a blur of chaos. Edwin, fueled by righteous fury, threw every patron out of the house, ignoring their protests and pleas for refunds. "Out! All of you!" he shouted, chasing them down the driveway with a broom. Thomas tried to plead his case. "Master, I only wanted to—" "Silence!" Edwin roared. "You've disgraced my home, tarnished my name, and stolen my cufflinks for your ridiculous outfit." Thomas looked down at his gold-plated ensemble and chuckled nervously. "They looked better on me?" Edwin pinched the bridge of his nose, trying to suppress the urge to throttle his servant. By morning, Edwin had restored order to the mansion. The Scarlet Manor was no more. Thomas, however, faced the consequences of his actions. Edwin sentenced him to clean every inch of the house, from the wine-stained floors to the lipstick-smeared mirrors. "And when you're done," Edwin added, "you will personally apologize to every neighbor for the noise and chaos you've caused." Thomas groaned but dared not protest. As he scrubbed the floors, he muttered under his breath, "A brothel was more fun than this." Edwin, overhearing, smirked. "What was that, Thomas?" "Nothing, Master. Just admiring the shine on the floor." The mansion was a shadow of its former self, with crimson curtains piled in corners and gaudy furniture discarded in the backyard. Thomas scrubbed furiously, sweating and grumbling as Edwin supervised, arms crossed and eyebrow arched. "You missed a spot," Edwin remarked, pointing to a particularly stubborn stain on the library floor. Thomas muttered under his breath, scrubbing harder. The neighbors, curious about the chaos, peeked through the gates as Edwin made sure Thomas's penance was public knowledge. "I've never seen such a disgrace," Mrs. Applewood from next door huffed, shaking her head. "Quite a show, though," Mr. Thompson chuckled. "I might have popped in myself if I'd known." Hearing this, Edwin's glare was enough to send Mr. Thompson scurrying away. Weeks later, Thomas, desperate to regain his master's trust, devised a plan. After finishing his punishment, he approached Edwin with a sheepish grin and a proposal. "Master, I've learned my lesson." "Truly I have," Thomas began, wringing his hands. "To make it up to you, I'll organize a charity event to restore your reputation." Edwin eyed him suspiciously. "A charity event?" "Yes. A grand ball for the town with proceeds going to Riverdale's orphanage. It'll show everyone your generosity and erase the colorful memories of the Scarlet Manor." Edwin mulled it over. "You're organizing it under my supervision. And if there's even a hint of trouble?" "No trouble. Just pure, wholesome fun," Thomas promised, though he crossed his fingers behind his back. The day of the charity ball arrived, and the mansion gleamed like new. Guests arrived in elegant attire, marveling at the transformation. Edwin stood at the entrance, greeting them with a dignified smile, while Thomas skulked in the background, ensuring every detail went smoothly. The evening was a roaring success. Dancers twirled to lively music, and the auction raised a hefty sum for the orphanage. Even Mrs. Applewood, who had been Edwin's harshest critic, seemed impressed. "You've outdone yourself, Mr. Langston," she said, sipping her tea. "It's as if nothing ever happened." Edwin forced a smile. "Indeed. Nothing at all." As the last guest departed, Edwin found Thomas lounging in the library, sipping a glass of champagne. "Well, master, I'd say the event was a hit," Thomas said, raising his glass. Edwin sighed. "I'll admit you redeemed yourself. But don't think I've forgotten your antics." "Of course not, sir. I'm a changed man," Thomas declared, placing a hand on his heart. "From now on, I'll only focus on serving you faithfully." Edwin raised an eyebrow. "Good. Because if I find out you've been scheming again, you'll be scrubbing floors until you're as old as Mrs. Applewood." Thomas grinned nervously. "Perish the thought, master. Perish the thought." As Edwin left the room, Thomas leaned back with a sly smile. "Well, maybe just one or two small schemes." Despite Thomas's incorrigible nature, life returned to normal at Langston Manor, or as normal as it could be with Thomas around. The story of the Scarlet Manor became a legend in Riverdale, whispered about in taverns and joked about at dinner parties. And while Edwin remained ever vigilant, a part of him couldn't help but chuckle whenever he caught Thomas up to his harmless antics. For in the end, life in Riverdale was never dull, especially when Thomas was involved.